Well, let me start off. You'll excuse me, won't you? How many of you have you all been here? Anybody here for the first time for this thing tonight? Okay, so few of you have not been here to the other sections of this course. This course has been this course has been a series of presentations by different analysts on masculine psychology and masculine personality, and I have been happy to make a couple of these presentations. One that focused on sort of the basics of masculine initiation, which I will go over quickly again tonight, in order for us to address our topic tonight, which is a topic more related to maturation and what I might say the flowering of the full possibilities of masculine personality and masculine psychology. And so let me just start out by saying, by a little commercial here for this new book in this series of books on masculine psychology. This is the second volume in the 5-volume series. The King, Warrior, Magician, Lover was the that I'm doing with Douglas Gillette, my co-author. The King, Warrior, Magician, Lover was the survey. This is the first of what we call the male quartet, which is the volume on each of the archetypes that we'll be talking about tonight. This is the king within, accessing the king in the male psyche, and it has a lot of the, if you get a chance at the bookstore to look at the resources and the diagrams and so forth in the appendices, you will get a lot more clarity on the things I'll be talking about tonight. I'll leave this out here so that maybe at the break you can look at some of that. A lot of the illustrations of the mythological and historical materials that are assumed in this work are there. And that really talks about integrity and the achievement of wholeness in masculine personality. So I will be talking a little bit out of this book on the King Within tonight, focusing on the flowering of maturity in the masculine personality. Now, this little diagram that I passed out, I'm going to go over with you. Everybody should have this. I'm going to go over this with you. These diagrams are also in and elaborated in a sequence in this King volume in the appendices. There will also be some others in this book on the magician and the analyst that I took this particular one from. Now, those of you that are familiar with my work that's been coming out, bear with me. And those of you that are not, you'll have to bear with me too, because there's a lot of complexity here. But it's not as complicated as it looks. And let me just go over a series of assertions that I make about the nature and dynamics of the masculine personality and the structure of the masculine self as opposed to what I believe to be the structure of the feminine self. And you may have attended one of our conferences recently in which a prominent Jungian analyst made some comment about the delusions of gender difference. Well, my sense is that anybody that is not aware of gender differences, number one, is not a Jungian. And number two, it may not be delusional, but is in massive denial. And how someone that's supposed to be informed about research and so forth could turn the question of gender into an opportunity for just a mere statement on political correctness and sociological reductionism, I find that very amusing. and I'll address that in other settings. But let me just say this. Let me go through this with you. Carl Jung's psychology is built on the idea that the unconscious has deep structures. That just as Chomsky says in his linguistics, and Levi-Strauss says in his structural anthropology, the human psyche is hardwired at deep levels. We are not a tabula rasa. We're not a blank slate for society to come in and simply, as some behaviorists used to argue, simply press some pattern upon us, and our organism is totally pliable and has no inner agendas. From a Jungian point of view, as with these other points of view, the capacity to learn languages is innate, and that's been quite clearly established now. Immense amounts of research are coming out to show just how much behavioral potentials, how many schemas are innate and given with the birth of an infant. Jung, however, had a lot more assumptions that I share, and one of them was that the human psyche is quadrated, that it is in some deep way fourfold. And he studied comparative world cultures, and one of the projects that I have, if I can ever get this series off of my back, is to bring together a lot of the history of art and religious symbolism in which this fourfoldness is presented. Jung, in his collected works, has enormous examples of this, but you have to search your way through them to see them. I would like for us to be able to, I'd like to be able to give you a slideshow sometime and just go through cross-culturally the extent to which human beings cross-culturally, interracially, interfaith, have imaged the world in four quarters. That is, four different sectors presented as world maps. There are many of these images in here in this text, so you'll be able to see some of them there. Less widely known, however, is Jung's assertion that the deep structures of the self, the total archetypal self, had the shape of an octahedron. That there was some way in which the deep unconscious could be talked about using a geometrical model that was octahedral in shape, these being octahedrons. If you look in Ion Volume 9-2, you will see Jung's attempt to decode the octahedral shape of the psyche. You can look at this. I'll show you one of these. There are a number of them. This is from the Ion volume. I didn't know this existed when I was doing the work on this. I had never paid any attention to these octahedral structures. John Layard came along. He was one of Jung's students. He wrote a book called The Celtic Quest, and in the appendix to that book you'll find this diagram, which is another attempt based on Celtic mythology to decode what this octahedral shape of the deep self is. Toni Wolff did her own work on quadration, and we've placed her work there to contrast with the model that we're presenting. And then, of course, this diagram that I have passed out to you. In short, I believe that Jung was right that the self can be understood both masculine and feminine in terms of four basic components. Jungians for many years have argued that the fourfoldness was four functions: intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensation. I don't think that's accurate, and I will show you briefly why. And in any case, what I want to suggest to you is that if you look carefully at this diagram, you can see an alternative to decoding what Layard calls the diamond body. The one that we use, which has male and female psyche having essentially the same kind of challenge of development on 4 lines of development. And I'm going to talk briefly about what I think those 4 lines of development are for both males and females. I will go over very briefly the asymmetry between masculine and feminine that corresponds to enormous amounts of research data that we have now, and burgeoning amounts of research data, both in terms of psychopathology, social pathology, and studies in recent studies by feminist psychologists and others. Then I want to focus with you on the issue of that we have before us tonight. So what's the big deal? What is wholeness? Everybody throws that term around. I want to argue that it's not an esoteric concept with no content. I want to argue that it has very specific content, understandable content, content that we can get a handle on to understand what the nature of the challenge of wholeness really is. That it's not simply some vague word that people use that people can't really define. Then I also want to talk about integrity and what contemporary psychoanalysis means when we talk about cohesiveness or integrity. And I want to have us think together about why that is an issue. Why would that be an issue to think about maturation? And I'll be talking about the forces in the psyche that I believe are there. Jung talks a lot about dialectical polarities. I think that's a way to think about our struggle, that there are polarities built into us that we have to learn how to balance and contain. And then I'll be focusing on the issue of achievement of that, differentiating myself from those that think that this sort of just happens. The self just leads you into this wholeness. At one level, that's right, but tonight I want to put myself on the line against quietism in psychology. I used to have a lot of fights about quietism and spirituality and religious circles. Well, I want us to talk about the incredible effort of the struggle for individuation, so that we can understand why we would use a word like achievement to go with this. So any comments or questions before I launch into talking about what I think the building blocks are, so that I can move on toward the challenge of maturation and flowering of mature personality? Any comment or question or agenda you want to lay out, make sure I address? Be thinking about. I'll give you another chance at that, because I want us to have plenty of time to discuss tonight. Let me just start out by saying that in a series of lectures available through the Jung Institute and in these books, I have been trying to argue that in the structure of the self are things that we could well call today biograms, programs if you want to use computer language, or biograms if you want to use ethological or sociobiological language. That is to say, there are innate schemas in us which, if they are encouraged to unfold, will bring online certain capacities of a maturing human self. This, I want to suggest, is it's not just a Jungian idea. This kind of idea is very widespread now, in not only in ethology and sociobiology, but in other schools of psychoanalysis. For example, the contemporary Freudian self-psychologist, the school of self-psychology and intersubjective school, talks a lot this way, that there are schemas innate that unfold under conditions of nurture which are good enough to bring the self unfolding. So this is not some concept just limited to a Jungian perspective, but it's one that's being widely discussed in psychoanalysis today. I argue, and let me articulate this to lay some misconceptions about my work to rest. I do not, and I never have argued, that these 4 programs are the only programs in the psyche. And I have never argued that these are the only archetypes relevant to the self of either males or females. However, I do, with Jung, take very seriously the study of mythology and mythological images as a research resource for depth psychology. And if you look at all these pictures in depth psychology about the structure of the world, there are 4-fold structures of the world. And the dominant presentation of the human experience of space is 4-fold. And that is there to be seen by anybody that looks at the evidence. And so my methodology is I look at what is presented in the behavior of this particular species, and I ask myself, well, I wonder why that is. Why is it that human beings seem to think there are 4 directions? All over the world, they think there are 4 directions. Why are there not 360 directions? There could be, the number of directions you can argue can be seen as arbitrary, but it's not arbitrary in human experience. There are 4 directions, 4 elements, 4 rivers, 4 winds, 4 mountains, 4 colors, etc., throughout world mythology. So these 4 biograms I believe to be a biogram for aggression, which I call the warrior biogram or warrior archetype. There's a line, in other words, a line of development, I argue, that is a separate line of development for aggression. In contrast to Freud, I don't think there's simply a movement from aggression, sadism to love. I think that I just went to a conference on aggression in New York run by the Freudians. They admitted that they've never had this idea clear about aggression, that they've never agreed about whether it's a separate line or not. And that has been the state. I argue it's a separate line of development. Healthy assertiveness is, in an integrated self, is its highest goal. And when that line of development is fully developed and integrated, we'll get to the integrity part, it serves self, community, and world. It is that inner potential which, in my view, is behind knighthood ideals in most cultures. And I say knighthood ideals because it is extremely difficult to get this potential integrated in a way that it serves the community and the world without running rampage. We can think about that later, about how difficult it is. Another biogram is a biogram for the utilization of knowledge or cognitive development. You might even argue moral development, which we can put in the magician sector of the psyche. If you've studied Fowler's faith development, if you've studied Kohlberg's moral development, if you've studied Piaget's cognitive development, those schools of thought would be addressing that kind of development, of that kind of potential in the psyche, the capacity to mature along the line of criticism, mature along the line that some would say today of healthy deconstruction, being able to see through things that need to be seen through, to stop being naive and gullible, but to be able to recognize things of worth when you see them. That is to say, an immature development in this cognitive program for understanding. An immature development could do things as varied as lead you to be a fundamentalist in some school of psychology or religion, or it could lead you to be a nihilist, a cynic, believing in nothing. So this thing can malfunction in being credulous or destructive of any meaning. You know, a lot of philosophy today in our American universities has turned into the destruction of meaning. You know, a lot of students will go to philosophy classes expecting to find all sorts of explorations in meaning, and discover that the exercise has to be showing that there is no meaning that's not merely socially constructed. So anyway, so there's that line of development. It's a cognitive line of development. At its highest levels, it utilizes knowledge, just like aggression. It utilizes knowledge for the self, to enhance the self, to serve the community and the world. And so you can think about the shadow expressions of that one, just as you can think about the shadowy or destructive expressions of the aggression line. Third line of development is a line of development called the lover biogram or program. It is affiliative functioning. It has to do with joyful embodiment and sexuality. It has to do with the capacity for intimacy. It has to do with the capacity to drop one's boundaries and let one's boundaries become more permeable so as to let others in to one's life. It has to do with the capacity really to experience one's oneness with nature and the world. In fact, a lot of nature mysticism is grounded in the lover sector of the psyche, and the capacity to really sense one's oneness with the world. And I would always like to say that a sensitivity to ecological issues is grounded in that sector. Because if you're into the kind of angelism that a lot of people are into today, intellectuals, you know, you really don't need a body. You know, if you're dominated by the magician circuits, this character never thinks about his body. If he does anything about it, he just thinks about it. But the idea of being in the body and being an animal is something that the magician is. That's not real familiar territory. They're more voyeuristic, and you'll notice this a lot. People, I have noticed that people who tend to de-emphasize the significance of the body, including gender differences, tend to be really into the magician, and just that body stuff is not that important. See? But the lover line of development is the shadow side of it. we see all the time in addictions. I like to congratulate my friends that have had substance abuse problems and say, you know, you have got wonderful lover energy in your psyche. And it's true. And the reason that people, I think, have difficulties either with addiction or with major depression is that they have enormous capacities to feel. And that's the good side. The bad side is that when you feel anything very much, you're going to feel pain. You know, you can't get this lover program online without a lot of pain. If you get it online, pain. You will also get some joy and ecstasy, but loads of pain. And that's why Robert Bly always makes this emphasis on grief and the importance of grief work for men. Now, you know, there are a lot of these boy journalists around the country who love to ridicule and shame midlife men because they get off and do grief work, as if that's somehow shallow or something to be laughed at and made fun about. Well, you know, I always like to consider the source on that, because anybody that makes fun of people that are grieving have got some unpleasant discoveries to make in their life. And there will come a time when that won't be nearly so funny, when they have had a little of the tragedy rub off on them in life. So, and we'll see in a minute why midlife men had better be into grieving, because that is a waking up of their lover capacities, which for most men are subdued in early and middle adulthood. And because of societal things, and I don't think it's just societal things, I think there's some sociobiological factors that lead men to push that stuff aside until midlife. But in any case, without these lover capacities, one is crippled in one's capacity to really value self, value the other, really value the other, to see the beauty in the world, and to be able to sense the wonder and joy of it all. And one will not have much sense about singing or dancing or any other kind of joyful expression. In short, that's not very much of a way to live without that in your life. There are a lot of people today, male and female, that don't have this very much online in positive ways. That gets us through midlife, really. For both males and females, the challenge then is this fourth biogram, which I associate with all the contemporary literature on generativity. That is, in the 50s, men and women have an opportunity, which we discourage them about this in our culture, but there is an opportunity for a full flowering of inclusive nurture. This is the biogram for inclusive nurturing. For those of you that come out of Christian backgrounds, this is the biology of the Good Shepherd. And I want to argue that all of I'm very indebted here to Erik Erikson's work, the great Freudian psychoanalyst, who did the first writing when he was studying, did all this work on Gandhi and other major figures, Gandhi and Jesus, highlighting these generative capacities that are in the psyche of human beings. Now, I want to emphasize tonight what a radical idea this is. I mean, you can go around a lot in our world and investigate people's views of the human. And if you talk to a lot of people, you will not find them arguing that there is a biology of generativity, or that there is a biology underlying the Good Shepherd, or that there's a biology. Let's say some of you may be out of Reformed Judaism. You know, in Reformed Judaism, there is a vision of the Messianic age that might come. If a Messianic age of peace and justice were ever to come, this biogram for generativity would be the human biological potential in both females and males that would have been evoked and supported and released. You can see the shadow side of this inclusive nurturing biogram. It is control. You know, I'm going to do it for your own good. And so tyranny, the so-called benevolent dictator, whether it's a pope or whether it's a bishop or a business leader or a mayor or a father or whatever, you can, or a mother, you can see that the fantasy of doing things for people can be very shadowy. But this is the biogram which integrated. Here again we got this integrity issue, this issue of having it integrated into a self. When it is balanced with a sense of boundaries, which you get from the line of development on aggression, if it's balanced with a capacity for critical and prophetic thinking, which you get through this cognitive development, if it's balanced with a sense of the value of others and their beauty, then this capacity for inclusive nurturing can be an incredible blessing to others through mentoring, through parenting, and through leadership in the world. So that's a quick round on my understanding of these powers. The four powers are, in my view, very much parallel in males and females. The difficult thing comes for men and women in what comes online most powerfully in adolescence, and what usually tends to weight more toward midlife. With males tend to be flooded with aggression and to have a hard time telling the difference between being a predator and being a lover in their young adolescent years. Now, there are people that think that's just because of socialization. Well, the way that it's shaped and emphasized and so forth, no doubt, has a great deal to do with culture and socialization. But the flooding of these aggression circuits, I believe to be grounded in evolutionary biology. There's enormous evidence about that. There's enormous evidence about gender differences in the evolutionary setting, about task with regard to the primate community. Males were warriors who were expendable in protecting the group. And you may want to look at some of the figures about how expendable males are today in cultures all over the world, in all sorts of ways. But females tend to have much more trouble with getting the aggression online, and this gets worse when they hit puberty. The research that has been done by Carol Gilligan and others shows that prepubescent girls have their aggression more accessible to them, but at puberty, it gets much more difficult to integrate, and the societies tend to make it even more difficult. And midlife, with the feminine personality, the feminine self, tends to see a reflowering of this assertiveness, these aggressive potentials. I was interested in Gloria Steinem, the art of the interview with Gloria Steinem, on whether you saw the front page with Faludi and Steinem, and the interview with Gloria Steinem, in which she was observing not too many young women in leadership in the feminist movement, in the women's movement. Midlife women. You get your feminist generals in midlife. That, I think, is consistent cross-culturally. What do you get with males? Midlife is flooding with erotic and intimacy issues, and the desire to unlearn a lot of the things that they put enormous investment in learning earlier in life. And that's one of the things. I want you to flag this in terms of male development, in terms of integrity. One of the principles, I would argue, is this, and this applies to both men and women. That is, one of the hardest things to do is to not throw out everything you learned when you were young. I want you to be thinking about that in terms of the challenge of integrity and wholeness. Because you will notice that both males and females will tend to undervalue the sectors of the self that they developed so well in the first half of life. And there is a tendency to flip over into the other sectors of the self and say, well, I've done that now. I'm doing this for the rest of my life. And then you can think about the abomination that we call retirement in our culture. And I want you to be thinking about how that is a rejection of wholeness in the self, because it does away with a lot of the developed values and virtues. Okay. So now let me go briefly into the tendency towards splitting that's built into the self, so that we can understand a little bit about this problem of wholeness, and then we'll stop and do some dialoguing before we take our break. Now, let me say again, I believe there are 4 lines of development, separate lines of development. I've imaged those with these arrows moving toward the center, which is a representation. You can think about that like the capstone of the pyramid, or you can think about that like the Buddhist idea of the 1 square inch of the 1 square foot, which is the goal of spiritual attainment. It's a visual representation of integration. You can think about that, if you've studied psychoanalytic theory lately, of Kohut's cohesive self, an integrated cohesive self. But look at this, the capacity to develop this energy moves toward the cohesion, bringing this energy into integration so that it does not split off and get acted out or left out. That's the challenge. What is the problem? Each of these are in dialectical tensions. The bad news is that the magician in you wants to go off and think about everything, and is always going to want to go off and think about things. That's what it does. It's not into integration. It's into study commissions. You know? Excuse me, sir, we've got all of these children in this school here being sold crack cocaine. Well, let's form a study commission. And we'll study all the sociological reasons for this. And we'll look at the family structures of all of these children that are being sold this crack cocaine and why they don't just say no. And all that sort of thing. It's amazing if you're ever around academics. Academics are I mean, it's an amazing thing, the way in which if it moves, they'll study it. If it moves, they'll interpret it. If it moves, they'll deconstruct it. In fact, you come in and you say, "I've got this severe problem. You know, I'm thinking about taking a 44 Magnum and going in and killing my boss and killing his boss and killing his boss and killing his boss." And then you talk to a deconstructionist, and deconstructionists say, "You're just looking at this wrong. Let's look at the way in which this reality has been socially constructed, and work with that for a while. And pretty soon you go out and, oh, is that it? Oh, okay, then no problem anymore, right?" No, that's not right. There are many issues that are real issues. There are many issues that are dynamic issues. There are many issues that are based on real structures in the self, and just interpreting them away do not change the reality, either psychological or social. So and so on. But each of these sectors wants to do its thing. And for example, if you really have a powerful nurturing program in you, and that's really been blessed, you were an oldest child. You got to be assistant parent in your family. It will not matter to that nurturing program how burned out you are. It will not matter to that program the fact that you don't have any appropriate boundaries or sense of limits on what you can give. It won't make any difference to that nurturing program the fact that you're not taking care of your body. It will never say, "Well, what have you been doing about your exercise program?" That nurturing program will never ask you if you've been jogging today. See? It will never ask you about your sex life, how adequate your sex life. It will never say, "When was the last time you went dancing?" Or "When was the last time you went out and listened to jazz?" Or "When was the last time you went out to a comedy club?" It's never going to ask you that. The only thing that thing's going to say is, "You left out some people you didn't nurture today," so forth and so on. So each of these, let's put it this way, is imperialistic. Each of them wants all of your time, all of your ego consciousness. It wants all of your libido. And so there is a tension. When Jung talks about the tension of opposites in the psyche and the difficulty in keeping the opposites up where you can see them, that's not just an abstract idea. You can see here that you can argue that there's content to that. The aggressive part of you wants you to work all the time. The lover part of you wants you to lick all the time, or some such thing. We've talked about the nurturing part, and we've talked about the magician part. So these things try to press towards splitting. And so the task of really overcoming that implicit tendency to split is an enormous achievement. And that's why I think we have to think about the achievement of wholeness, to think that when we talk about wholeness, it's not an abstract idea. It means you have been able to balance in a maturing self your aggression, your desires for affiliation, your critical capacities, and your grasp of ideas that are worth serving, values that are worth serving, and that you've been able to put some of that into your life as servanthood of some kind in the kingship or queenship sector. That's a tall order. So wholeness has content. In my view, it's fourfold in its fundamental content, and the tendency is for those things to split off, and we can talk in our discussion tonight about how they tend to split. And the task of individuation and the achievement of integrity and wholeness is a labor which requires a lot of strategy and reflection about how one is going to go about assessing where one is not whole and what one is going to do about it. Later on tonight, we'll be talking about then what do you do with your wholeness once you got it? Or as my recovery friends, people that are into recovery, okay, now we're recovered. Now what? See. So that's what we'll come back to. But let's stop there. We got about 10 minutes before we'll take a break. And let's just discuss this image of wholeness and this image of the task of achieving integrity and cohesiveness. And let's see what comes to your mind about this way of thinking about it. What comes to your mind as an issue that is an issue for you as you think about wholeness? Anybody? Yes.
I was going to ask you, do you think that you become more aware of these four types as you enter into midlife as the first real stage of awareness? And then once you do, you then start to deal with it, where you're not really as introspective about these types earlier than that?
I think he's asking, repeat this for the tape, he's asking that I think that the awareness of the varieties of the self, the different sectors in the self, grow at midlife. I think they either grow or one really stays unconscious most of the time. But actually, the really growing awareness, I think, comes in earlier adulthood. When the young female realizes that just being nice and loving is not getting her everything she wants, then she begins to reflect a lot on what is wrong here. She starts buying lots of books on women who love too much and things like that. And she starts talking to feminist therapists. And they are quite happy to help her figure this out. And the young male who, when he was 22, and he got his first job in whatever it was, and he could just see his career just going off like a Saturn V, and he didn't have too much time for anything but his BMW and his whatever, and then he runs into the business world, and then he notices that there are certain limits to aggression. That is, in terms of value, because he gets to meet a lot of people that are practically 140% or 190 proof aggression, and that's when he starts looking for those books like How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being. You've seen those books? Because he notices, aggression may not be all it's cracked up to be. I thought it was wonderful, but there must be something else other than aggression, because if aggression is all there is, then if I'm going to be what I thought I was going to be, I'm going to be like this guy. And frankly, if I had to be like this guy, I'd rather just go to the Bahamas or something, and to hell with this career, if I have to be like him. So he begins to realize, after he's been abused really well, after he's run into a guy that's got his aggression online and nothing else, and he's his boss, you know, and he's been thoroughly abused enough sadistically, then he begins to question this idea the macho man is everything, you know, the guy with the heaviest caliber handgun, you know, the guy that carries the 10 millimeter, you know, is the real man, you know. So both the young male and the young female, long before midlife, they start figuring out that there's something weird here about the way that I've been led to believe that life is. So they start working on this, but it takes a little bit longer to chase those dreams of early adulthood far enough to realize how one-sided they are. And like the young woman has her family, and she's got her house, and she's got this and that, and then she realizes, wow, she starts reading some of the literature about what happens to the self of a woman that has these things. And there's a lot of literature on that. And she begins to look at that, and the young male does the same thing. And maybe he is a very successful trader down on LaSalle Street. And maybe he's really made it. And you know, maybe he's got a part in a company, and he makes, like some of these guys I know, millions of dollars a year, and have succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. I mean, he started out to be successful. He didn't start out to be this successful. But then he's in his 40s now, and now he's really thinking about this. He has achieved all those things, and he knows that it's not full. It's not complete. So I think you're really right. It really flowers in midlife, but it starts a little earlier than that. Yeah.
Because of the humbling, though, that you go through as you get older.
I think it's the disillusionment, the illusion of, see, these sectors of the psyche cast spells on you. Each one of them casts its spell. They're enchanting. And so you've got to have your illusion, the enchantment that each one of them is weaving, broken, for wholeness to emerge. Yeah, Mary?
Talking about this, I think that maybe I'm wrong, like somebody might get the idea that these sort of space-specific sectors that we go to should, if we have enough knowledge about this, you know, like in our early 30s, we should be able to do all this and work on that. And I think that you really do have to go through these sectors, and it just takes time.
It's life cycle stuff. She's saying it takes time. You can't just kind of know about it and then that fixes it. If you know about it, and you can bypass a lot of problems. It is life cycle stuff in its fullness. Now, we're always, you know, the mystics and all those people in tribal traditions always made these into spirals, you know. They would always portray this growth toward wholeness as a spiral. And, of course, they're right to do so. But that doesn't deny the life cycle thing she's talking about. Other comments? Yes?
If in your two-dimensional illustration the square in the center represents wholeness, when you look at the three-dimensional octahedron, how would you represent that wholeness?
Well, you want to, yeah, I think you want to think about this as a Mayan temple, Mayan pyramid. You know Mayan pyramids, there are pictures of them here. You can look at this to break. In the Mayan pyramids, like at Chichen Itza and places like that, there's a temple right here on the top of the pyramid. And so it's really three-dimensional. So the integration is coming toward the center, and if you look at those old Mayan pyramids and a lot of the other pyramids around the world, they represent this because you have to climb your way up to that center. It's not easy to get there, yeah.
But if you look at the octahedron.
Yes.
And both ends.
Yes, that's right.
You represent wholeness is a core running through the center from top to bottom?
You could.
Or is it at the top?
Well, you could talk about there being a... See, there symbols, Paul Ricoeur says, symbols evoke more than you can ever say about them. You know, symbols are very rich, and there are many ways that a symbol will evoke insights like this one. That you can talk about that pole running down through it is the axis mundi of all the mystics, the center of the world. That's Jerusalem for the Jews or the Christians, you know, or Mecca for the Muslims. It's that integrates all the world. And that gets us to the thing we'll do after the break. That is, what is the relationship between the integrated psyche and the rest of the world? See, I mean, you can say that between, you can even talk about this as, I like to say that in this octahedron, remember now, for the male, Jung talked about the anima, the contrasexual feminine that's deeper in the unconscious. It's harder to get to than the shadow. And I think that represents the anima, and for the woman, the animus. So wholeness, psychological wholeness would be for a man certainly include far more sensitivity to your inner feminine. And you would not be trying to live your life as if deep within you there was not a contrasexual other that comes to you in your dreams. And the same thing would be true of a woman. But if we look at it this way, and we think about it as a mythology of the divine, you might say the god and the goddess, the king and the queen, have a world that opens up between them. If you look at a lot of mythology, what do the king and queen or the god and the goddess do? They open between them the space where the world is. And so your pole metaphor would be more appropriate there, that there would be a centeredness to the world that opens up between a mature man and a mature woman. There's a pole of centeredness that is in that world. That's complicated, but I think that's the way you could play with that. Yeah.
Early on in your lecture, in your overview, you talked about the lover, which, broadly speaking, is the issue of midlife in men. And you said something like, when your lover is online, there will be pain.
There will be pain, yes. Well, one way to get into that is just to read Bly's Iron John book, which goes into that in some depth about the role of grief for men. Men are trained, see, I think that evolution has set us up, males of our species, to, when we're in the age in which we're likely to be cannon fodder, or arrow fodder, or saber-toothed tiger fodder, that we are sort of set up biologically not to reflect too much on pain. There's a lot of evidence for that. There's even evidence in terms of the difference in blood supplies to the skin and how much a female will bleed if wounded on the surface of the body as compared with how much a male that's under adrenaline states will bleed. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to show that we evolved under conditions where young males were out there doing very violent battle on behalf of the community. So I think that we're predisposed biologically as young men not to feel too much because we're supposed to be dodging bullets and arrows and things like that. Also, society exacerbates that. I mean, we need to talk about balancing these things, but what society tends to do is to socialize young males into not feeling things. And if they do feel them, not to talk about them, and if possible, not to admit it. And so if a male has a real loss in early life, it is not really sanctioned too much for them in traditional cultures of any kind for them to show too much emotion about it. In fact, there are a lot of cultures in which you show your manhood by my torturing you. If I have to be able to torture you and have you not flinch. I have to be able to watch your eyes, and I have to be able to actually scarify you without your reacting, or you don't get accepted into the longhouse. And so that's on top of this evolutionary thing. So there's a lot of stuff loaded on males not to feel anything. And our culture is pretty bad about this too. And you can see that, just a second, I'll get to you just a second, Mary. But you can see this in this ridiculing of men's grief groups. I mean, it's quite clear that in our dysfunctional family, in our nation, males are not supposed to do this grief work. And if they do it and they let anybody know they're doing it, there are going to be articles written about them in which everybody can yuck it up about. You know. So I think it's biological and it's cultural. And so, but since this feeling capacity is in us, and since there is, as Jung, I think Jung was right, there is these schemas press toward wholeness. These schemas in you press toward recognition. Now that is automatic in you. And so there's going to come a time at which you're a man in your 40s, and you're going to be sitting there at your desk. Or I can remember when it hit me, I was on a 747 in a great big airport, and then you just sit there and start to cry. And you start trying not to cry. And when this thing hits you, it doesn't matter how much you try not to cry. You're going to sit there and cry. You may be at your desk. You may be in a big meeting with a big client. You know, you may be a surgeon in the middle of open heart surgery or whatever, but you start to cry and you can't stop. And then that kind of gets your attention. Other comments before we take a break?
Briefly, in your overview, that you now consider the typology format that was discussed earlier inaccurate, I think you said.
Well, it just, yeah. Did you want to ask another question about that?
No, I'm just curious.
Well, I don't mean it's inaccurate in terms of not useful. I think it's very useful, and a lot of my colleagues know a lot about that and do wonderful work with it. And the more I, learn about it, I think it's very useful. But I don't think that is the quadration of the psyche. I think that the thinking and intuition are in this sector, and I think sensation and feeling are in this sector. And I think it's no accident that psychologists of all kinds tend to depreciate these two sectors of the psyche, particularly this one. And Jungians tend to be notoriously biased against extroversion. And this is your sector of extroversion. So I don't mean to depreciate typology as a useful tool. I just don't think that it is what the images, the mythic images of the four quarters are referring to. I think it's referring to two of them, two of the sectors. I may be wrong about that. But when I'm working on this, I present this to you as a theoretical model, whereby I want to suggest that if you take the comparative schools of psychology and you take the evidence we have cross-culturally and cross-disciplinary, and you look at this model and start working at it at a dynamic level, you'll see that it organizes a lot of different schools of thought. Freudian, Cohutian and Adlerian, behavioral, cognitive. I mean, you can plot almost all the schools of thought on there, and it's very interesting, as Don Browning, who is not a Jungian, doesn't appreciate Jung very much, Browning says there are cultures in psychology, there are cultures of care. He says there are cultures of control. He says there are cultures of detachment. and he says they're cultures of joy. And Browning has no interest in quadration. He's done an objective study of psychology, he feels, and it falls into those sectors. Theodore Milan in his psychopathology says that there are 4 kinds of pathology, psychopathology. There are independent pathologies, there are dependent pathologies, there are detached pathologies, and there are ambivalent pathologies. Why ambivalent? For the reason I said about males. A young male soon discovers, a person that's very aggressive soon discovers that if you're aggressive enough, long enough, you'll be alone. And that makes everybody ambivalent, because we don't want to be alone. So anyway, let's take a short break. Let's try to keep it short, because I want us to come back and talk together about this idea of wholeness and integrity in the male psyche, and then the potential, the positive potential of this, which we don't tend to talk about enough. So we'll take about 10 minutes. And then is that a question for everybody? Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, out loud.
Okay. When Robert was talking about the ritual scarification of the young warriors and stuff, the thing that had popped into my mind was the whirling dervishes. And certain spiritual groups, when they, they do, they would stick knives into themselves, going into trance and that kind of thing. And I was thinking before, well, we think of young warriors, they go through this test of strength and pain and all that, but when you get into this other thing, it's like you're getting into detachment of the body, which comes out of the magician. And I was asking how these kind of tie in.
Well, the thing about the Sufis is really interesting. You could spend a whole lot of time talking about the psychology of Sufism and the whirling dervishes. You listen to Rumi's poetry, that's loaded with lover energy. He's got that poem where he says, he's talking to God, and he says, if you put a knife into me, says, I won't even flinch. I won't even go to the doctor. But what he's talking about there is lover. He's so open to whatever God wants to do. He's not going to protect himself. Whatever his beloved divine reality does, he won't do anything about it. The other thing you'd have to think about in that context would be spiritual warriors.
In the way you're talking about Job, too, would be like that. But then you've got the actual people like the Indians, too, that they will go around with pins. Stuff.
Oh, sure.
So we'll get to the real physical and the fluctuation.
Well, males, for example, think about the arms race. Think about our collective masculine occupation of space. This is the space we are able to get into easiest. This sector of the male self. This is the one that comes the easiest. This is the one that is best at torture. And torture is a worldwide phenomenon. And males that have got their warrior and their magician worked up real well together make great torturers. They can think of all these creative ways to inflict pain. And they can think of all the ways in the world to create new weapons to sell to folks so that they can sell them and give them to their young males. So that every 14-year-old can have his very own M16 and his own phosphorus grenades, whatever teenager wants, And I'm not kidding you. You need to look into the figures on the arms trade. And then you have to ask, is this a rational expression of our species? What it is acting out of males that are splitting, mega splitting at a very low level of masculine development. Why is that going on? Well, that's the easiest thing to do. It doesn't take a whole lot of achievement to get to be a warrior magician. And that's why males of our species major in it. I'm not male bashing here. I want to be clear about that. it would be natural for people to tend to cluster in the things that are the easiest to get into when you're young. But we should be able to hope that men, as they get older, can get beyond that. And the other thing that we ought to be able to hope, which is this achievement of integrity and the movement toward wholeness that we're talking about tonight, is we ought to be able to help some men at least move around this thing and do what they say in mythology, dance the four quarters. What is an image of masculine maturity and masculine wholeness, and this would also be true for the feminine, dancing the four quarters. It's harder to do that, yeah.
Could you say in a certain sense that when you deal with the warrior magician, we're dealing with the sadist, and we're dealing with the lover, and I don't know if the king gets in, we're dealing with more of the masochist, which would suffer for the pain, and the other would inflict on others?
Right. I mean, and that, the shadow system, he's talking about the shadow systems in each. If you're flooded with lover energy, you'll tend to be more masochistic. Flooded with warrior energy, you'll tend to be more sadistic. But the issue is, have these energies not be flooding you, have them be integrated into a cohesive self-structure so that they can be utilized by you, stewarded by you, for more healthy personal and communal purposes. Yeah.
Something that she was originally saying, I think you have a misconception about this warrior part, and the societies of warrior, like the Sundance Society, or for that matter, a high school football team, where you are going through things to learn to deny pain or something, is not detachment of the body. If anything, you're at a period of super concentration on the body. You're just learning to control the body so that you do not, when the time comes, react to pain, to go through it. Like I say, anybody that go watch a high school football team lineman work out, that's what they're doing.
How many of you men, when you were in football training, had the whole team, the coach would line the whole team up, entire team up, and tell you, okay, now you're going to tackle all these guys one after the other. And then he would say to the coach would say to the other members of the team, if you let him tackle you, I am going to have you running laps until tomorrow morning. And then that goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, a lot of men have been through that. And if you're afraid of pain, that kind of experience really works on that. There's a lot of that. I mean, the whole business. But let's try to keep this on a larger picture, and let's try to think about the achievement of some wholeness, because that requires not just getting into this lover sector. Because see, what is the danger when you get into that in midlife? Think about what this circuit will do if it's not balanced. I like to say that these lover energies are the universal solvent. They will dissolve anything. They are totally like the most powerful acids. They will just, any structure in your life will disappear if you really get into this. So, you've heard something there is that doesn't love a wall, it's lover energy. And not only does it not love walls, it doesn't love limits, it doesn't love boundaries, it doesn't love commitments, it doesn't love any of those things. It's open to experience, see? And if you get into that and it's not balanced with any of this other stuff, then your life will go right down the tube. Yeah.
Are these boundary issues you're talking about
Yep.
in your book? You talk about Adler and
boundary issues. you know, you can't have a relationship if you don't have boundaries, because what you have is a merger if you don't have boundaries. And a lot of people mistake a merger for a relationship. And they call that today, they call that codependency. It's just a relationship that has inadequate boundaries. And, you know, if you study family systems theory, you find that there's a lot of problems in dysfunctional families about inadequate boundaries. But let's look at this now. Latter part of life. Hold on to that just a second, Bill. Latter part, I'll let you you're about my age, so you can talk about this generativity thing here, the challenge of generativity. But see, here's what we got to focus on tonight now, because until you get here and pick this thing up, you haven't gotten the fourth quarter in there. And if you try to be a whole man by coming from here to here, what do? Well, you jettison your warrior responsibilities. You say, that was just my young man. I just did that as a young man. It has nothing to do with what I am now, in my 40s. You also tend to depreciate the insights you had. Well, what is it? Well, you know, I used to try to think my way out of things. Now I feel my way. Now I'm just, I've moved to San Diego, and I do a lot of workshops, body work. Listen, you got to go to San Diego and read the free newspaper. But anyway, and it's really a trap. I mean, you get into that, and well, what's important? Well, experience, and the latest experience, I'm really into this, or the language. I'm really into this, or I'm into that, right? And you can pretty much completely just space out if you're not careful when you get to this place. Yeah.
I have a basic question. James Wiley focused in his lecture on the hero's quest on the failure of the hero to achieve wholeness, and I was wondering if you had any examples from mythology, from movies, on someone who has.
Well, I associate the hero's quest with the line between adolescence and adulthood right here. A hero is doomed because he's a grandstander. He really believes that the problems of the human species can be solved by him. It's like a lot of fundamentalist ideas about the Messiah. It's like, there's all we need is this one person. That's sort of a hero version of the Messiah. We just need one person that's got this together. And it doesn't need to be a team player, It's you see Top Gun. Look at the movie Top Gun, because that's about the hero and the limitations of the hero. And it's really a problem about narcissistic needs and the need for mirroring and being recognized for how wonderful you are for addressing these big problems. And so the warrior initiation really is a breaking out of that into a realization that the problems are too big and they cannot be done alone. They cannot be met alone. And so that's why a warrior virtue is always one that values the fellow, the team members, and realizes the need for compatriots in struggle. So, I mean, then you can go on a long way. But you could take this on all around the four quarters. What else would you say about the hero's limitations in terms of each of these? Well, if the hero understood much, he would also get that. He'd be clear about his limitations, because this is your inner bullshit indicator. And it works on you too, and if you think you're going to solve all the world's problems by yourself, well, that's you need your trickster. Bill, you were going to say something.
Well, I have a kind of a could it be question.
Okay.
I'm a little cautious speculating on the midlife female, but we said that the male approaching, moving through the warrior stage, position stage, and creeping up on the lover stage may be beset with grief, and that's a dominant emotion there. So I said, well, what's going on over the feminine side? And it seems appropriate that could be that the feminine dominant emotion as she creeps up on the warrior function is one of anger and boundaries and
might be rage.
Shit I used to put up with, kind of.
Might be rage.
Yeah, it might well be.
Now, sometimes I talk in ways that make it sound like I don't think rage is good stuff. I think it's gold ore. And I think that anybody that hasn't got access to their rage gold ore cannot distill it and refine it and get it into warrior gold. In other words, there's no way to get from niceness to warrior gold without digging up some rage gold ore. That's the problem with initiation processes. There's no way to go from denial of a power to integration of the power without acting it out in a infantile way at some point. In other words, it's very difficult to develop your magician in the same way. You think you're stupid and don't know anything. Then you learn some things. And holy God, I can interpret something. I have now learned the object relations mode of diagnosing borderline personalities. I've even read Kernberg. So if it moves, now I know about all the splitting and all the object relations jargon about that. And so now I know all about psychopathology. So you're going to have a little magician inflation before you learn that there are 1,462 different ways to understand that. And none of them agree. So then you start working on trying to get a little more humility into the magician. You follow that? The initiation process starts this way. Let me run through it quickly. I don't have the power. That's the first stage. You've got it. I'm nice and you're a son of a bitch. A real aggressive asshole. Then I discovered in myself. That's what the Jungians talk about the recollection of the projection. So that's when the first big thing, when I know that I got it too. So I know that I've got aggression, I've got understanding, I've got affection or the capacity to feel, or I've got nurturing agendas. But after you get it, there may be a split second there where you've got it balanced, but it very quickly goes into inflation. I mean, that's what Jung talks about when he talks about the monopersonality. He's talking about when you touch the archetypal resources in your psyche, you will almost always get inflated first. Then you run into reality, and it begins to knock you down. And you learn that you didn't know quite as much as you thought you did. You're a new student of karate, and you've learned to do some movements, and then you meet that 7th degree black belt. And you know that you got some more to learn. And then the process of being an apprentice, getting to be a master, and so forth. And then the highest stages, learning to steward it, which is what I want us to get to before we get through tonight, the stewardship of these things. But other questions and comments about this that you brought from the break? Yeah.
You talked about, the adolescent stage where the young male has the testosterone, sort his body, young female starts to go for etc. And we go through older, and then we get to the midlife crisis, which both sexes go through. But I never heard you address menopause in female. You found that to have any effect in the warrior stage?
Well, I haven't done a lot of thinking about that, but see, that's related to the crone stage in women. And one of the things we have to think about is the 50s in men and women. And that's what I want us to address now a little bit. I promised one of you that I would say more about retirement as an issue, because in our culture we tend to take people who are in their 50s and we make them feel like they're worth less. In fact, when the latter part of the 40s, men start feeling more and more in danger in terms of their sense of worth and being valued by others. And then when they get into their 50s, they start, in our culture, feeling expendable from the firm and so forth. And then you get your first issue of Modern Maturity magazine, you know. And then, boy, oh my God, you know, AARP membership. And there is no sense of the generativity that used to be common in all human tribes. That is to say, when you got to be an elder, there was not only a appreciation for you and a role for you, there were a lot of responsibilities for you. It wasn't just honorific. I mean, that's when you took over seeing to the widest possible well-being of the tribe. Now that is what we need to be looking at here tonight. What is this integrity in terms of masculine maturation and this sense of wholeness? I want to argue this. Let me throw this out. If you got that, you are holding on to the virtues of each of these, and there is no way that you can any longer be just a private person. In other words, what I want to argue with you tonight is that if you get that, what do you get? You get community too. You get a sense of the community. You get a sense of the public. You get a sense of the fact that the buck stops with you in this world, and that you cannot delegate the authority for the stewardship of this planet to Songus or Buchanan or whoever. It doesn't really matter, finally, in one sense, that the buck actually stops with each man and each woman that are holding this integrity together. In other words, there's no way, do you follow what I'm trying to say? There's no way to be private if you've got those four quarters together. Yes?
But isn't that, this gentleman mentioned Jim Whiteley's thing, isn't that where the hero becomes the mature hero?
Well,
you have your limits that I'm not the only one, but indeed it is.
One can be heroic then, right? See, I want to keep that hero idea as an adolescent psychological phenomenon, but that one then can become heroic in the sense we use that larger sense. Heroic in what sense? Heroic in the sense that you think you really matter, and that you might really try to make a difference in your world, and that you might not be so easily shamed. For example, in fact, this is what I think we've all got to deal with in terms of integrity and in terms of authenticity and in terms of empowerment for not just men but women too. That is, if we really think that we're achieving some kind of integrity and wholeness, that is not an empty concept. What does that mean? I like to say it means you're befriending your great self is one thing it means. And it means that you're not going to be so easily shamed when you start trying to make a difference in the world and somebody says, my God, you really think you could matter. How arrogant, you know, or you really think that you might make a significant difference. You know, there are a lot of people that will raise their eyebrow at you and think, boy, this person's grandiose. They think they can make a difference. And my point of view is, if you are attaining full empowerment as a woman, or if you are attaining full empowerment as a man, you're not going to be easily shamed about that. you're going to intend to make a difference. And if somebody wants to try to shame you about that, I think you'll know something to do about your response to that. You won't be too impressed by their attempt to shame you about that. You follow that? That is, if fully empowered men and women take themselves real seriously. Now, they can play, and they can dance, and they can sing, and they can, even, some of them can even drum. You know? But they don't minimize. In other words, they're not shrinking into smaller selves. You know? And they also don't let people with real small selves shame them too easily. You know, I used to say, they don't let dwarves shame them, but I've stopped saying that because there's been too much dwarf throwing lately, and I don't want to join the antagonism toward those good people. But small people with real small selves that want you to be small. So, other comments or questions about that? We've got about 15 minutes. So in other words, empowerment, which is what integrity and wholeness would bring. You know, Kohut talks about this. He says, "What if you got a real cohesive self, what do you like?" Well, you got a lot of zest for life. What else? Well, you got a real good sense of humor. Well, what else? Well, you got ambitions that some people might think were too large for you. But what Kohut said about this is the healthier you get in your grandiosity and your narcissism, the more you kind of assume you can do it. And not only do you kind of assume you can do it, you kind of assume that you deserve to do it. You know? And you're not as vulnerable to being shamed by your taking yourself serious. So it's not just Jungians that talk this way. I mean, Kohut himself, if you read Kohut's view of healthy selfhood, it's powerful. And God knows we need today a view of selfhood that is larger than most that's being given to us. Other comments or questions or yes?
Did I hear you say correctly that the hero's quest, the journey to Ithaca, is more self-centered, whereas a heroic journey and the achievement of wholeness is more universal-centered or world-centered?
Well, it's all in the motive, you know. Yeah. Versus world-centered, cosmos-centered. It's like the warrior as opposed to the hero. The warrior or knight within, in either males or females, and I think it's in both, is serving something large, and it's serving something worthy, and it's not just my ego. All of these warrior traditions deal in their spirituality with, for example, in Kendo, the Japanese martial art that has to do with swords. The sword first is to cleave the ego of the sword's user. So all those traditions are trying to get past this infantile narcissism. Yes.
Kind of an anthropological question. We sort of loosely labeled these quadrants as 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Tribally, anthropologically, in earlier days, a male or female that lived to age 50 was an old person.
Yes.
So was there some kind of diminution of the quantities of people that made it to these levels that we don't see now? Today, we all expect to live to be 50, 60, 70.
Yeah. I think what we have to realize about tribal cultures is that they had enormously sophisticated technology of initiation. And you got to be an adult very young. And you got brought into these qualities, many of them, at a much younger age than in our culture, where we've forgotten how to make people into adults. So adolescence just stretches out into the late 30s, you know. But even in those cultures, in many of those cultures, you had to get to be 39 or 40 before you were admitted into the highest secrets of the men.
But I'm thinking not many made it.
Not well, you know. In some ways, more made it then than make it now, because you have to ask yourself, if you look at our society, if you look at our society and look what's happening all over the world now, modernity is not an improvement, because you'd have to argue that the percentages of initiated people, males and females, in tribal cultures was probably vastly higher than in our world now. Yeah, Mary.
We're a little more tuned into the biological phases of people. Then could we say that our industrial civilization today is really screwing up our biological phase-specific developments, and so when we tend to be, we should move from the level of the magician earlier than we do. We're behind in the time on that, and we're just making compound.
Yeah, let me just repeat her comment. She's talking about the way that industrialism may be influencing our sensitivity to our biorhythms of all kinds. I don't think there's any question about it. There's enormous research. Architects, I've got the people that work as psychologists with architects. There is a lot of evidence that we are so bad now about being sensitive to our bodies and our biorhythms and the way we design buildings and everything else. There's no question about that. But we need to also think in a positive way about that. We've got to think about what is the challenge for us now. And I think the challenge is to think about forms of cultural organization and forms of voluntary organizations and forms of spiritual practice that take these sectors of the self seriously and ask ourselves, what can we do so that young women don't have to wait till their 40s before they get their aggression blessed and integrated. I mean, there's no, while there are these biological tendencies, what we need to be doing is designing culture and society and spiritual practices that help people become whole as soon as they can, so that they can shine in that wholeness a lot earlier. And there's no reason, for example, you know, there are a lot of women around who are trying to speak to women about the necessity for them to work on their warrior training much earlier in life. I'm a supporter of that, enthusiastic supporter of that. And by the same token, young males ought to be helped to learn a lot more about embodiment in different forms than warrior embodiment early on. For example, I mean, here in our city, we've got fantastic resources about teaching young men dance. And young men ought to never learn that being able to do modern dance is contradictory to their warrior potentials. And I know young men in the black community who have got a lot of this stuff very, very integrated, who are very skilled in terms of martial arts stuff, but also very good at dance, very good at drumming, very socially concerned, very involved in working in healing programs and so forth. So this is not just something that's a pipe dream. There are a lot of people that are aware of this. It's just that we're not doing it on a very large scale. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
First, could you distinguish the difference in what you mean by wholeness as opposed to integrity?
Yeah.
And secondly, can you give us some examples of either specific individuals or specific techniques that men have used to get to that point of integrating it and getting it all together to get to this point of wholeness?
I'll summarize that in 30 seconds. He's raising the question about, well, first thing, about the difference between wholeness and integrity. Their concepts are related. The wholeness, in one sense, is built into your deep hardwiring, into your blueprint. Your unconscious knows about wholeness, and it will be pressing you in ways that you and I don't understand to develop yourself, and it may do it in ways that are not too constructive. But the wholeness that's in your hard wiring will try to come out. The idea of integrity, as I'm using it, you know, it's a moral concept that goes with masculine maturation on one level, but I'm using it in a psychological way here, like Kohut and the self-psychologists use it. A cohesive self is one that does not automatically split under pressure and stress. We tend, under stress, we tend to split off into the one of these that we've got down better. For example, I've lived so much of my life in here, you know. 7 diplomas later, I finally figured out that wholeness would require some other sector of the psyche, you know. And so it's like you will, and to this day, when I am regressed, I will tend to kind of detach. In other words, you may be a good friend of mine, and you would think that when I get really regressed and feeling bad that I would reach out, but I won't. You follow that? When I start to regress, I will pull into this space and detach. Do what? Yeah. Now others that developed in different sectors will do different things. Some people, there are some people who, like this is a typical pattern among some women. If they start getting requests, they'll have another baby. Regress, they'll have another baby. So they'll have something to nurture. And they don't think about it as a regression into a certain sector, but often it is. So wholeness is there, but integrity, psychologically speaking, is when your personality, when you get it, the 4 quarters in touch with them, so you do not lose them when the going gets rough. And that is an achievement. That's why we said tonight, it's the achievement of integrity, you know, the achievement of wholeness. That's something that requires work and years. And even after, you know, you don't want to get too perfectionistic about this. You know, when you wake up in the quarter that you regress into, then you want to say, aha, I'm here again. Maybe I should call somebody. Right? Other comments or questions? We got, you can't go anywhere anyway with this storm. We just might as well just stay a while. Yeah, Charles.
I guess one of the things that I wanted to comment on is that as I look at the quadrants, I think it's a danger while as one goes through their life cycles, there might be a tendency sort of biologically for one aspect at different periods of the life cycle to come forward.
That's right.
But I think it's a danger to think that it comes out that simple. I like the spiral.
The spiral is really the way it really works.
Yeah, it's possible to tap into all those
That's right.
at any given point in one's life cycle.
And that would be the normative way.
Yeah.
That if the society and the culture really supported us, we would get into that dancing the 4 quarters much earlier, and men wouldn't be waiting around until they were in their 40s to sit and weep compulsively and so forth. So I think you're absolutely right. That's why these traditions emphasize the spiral. Yeah.
I guess another thing that I was thinking about is that getting into the area of integrity or that upper area. I know one of the things that sort of my experience of being involved with young men and men across a range is that we have a lot of older men, and that's relative, who want to be mentors.
Yes.
But one of the serious problems with these men is they can't stick with it. They have some superficial idea of what mentoring is.
Yes.
And so they can't stick with a younger person over a period of time. So, that's, I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's also an indication of whether or not one person is into this area, or what I think you're calling integrity.
Yes. Let me repeat that for the tape. Charles Payne of Hales Franciscan High School works a lot with young males in the course of his work as president. And they have a mentoring program, and he says that one thing that he notices is a struggle for mentors working with young males is that often they have a trouble being constant about maintaining a commitment over time in the task of mentoring. And he's pointing out that this is probably a problem related to what we're talking about as integrity. And I would want to just piggyback on that and say that capacity for generativity is what we're really getting at here. It requires the integration of these warrior virtues. The warrior can do things even when it doesn't feel good. And the warrior can continue with the mission even though they're not getting any praise for it right at the time. And so that is a warrior virtue that has to be integrated. Understanding has to be integrated. Valuing of the other has to be integrated. But it's not until you get this generativity online where this is why we like to say, what can you say about the king and the queen programs? Servant leadership, sacrifice. That kingship and sacrifice are always related. And that would be related to this, the capacity to stay with the nurturing task when it does not feel good, when I'm not being mirrored, when they're not saying, aren't you a wonderful mentor? But constancy over years. This is why our society is going to hell. We don't have enough people who can maintain constancy in the face of lack of appreciation. Yeah.
Would some of this deal with the fact of the way our culture is designed? We're down to nuclear families. We don't have the big extended families. We don't have the small clan type community. So if you want to be a mentor for a young man, maybe you have to go to a boys club or something. And it's not like the physical proximity isn't there for you to be there like a relative might be.
She's raising the question of the way in which the loss of our extended families and much of our culture and the nuclear family model being related to this. There's no question about it. One of our challenges in our society today is to be creative, and build societal structures by which we stop abandoning all the people that we're abandoning. What can you say about a woman or a man who has achieved this integrity and wholeness as a woman or a man? One thing that you can say about them, I will argue, and I'll argue with anyone, is that they don't easily write everybody off. They don't write people off. Human life is not cheap to them. They don't easily shrug their shoulders and look the other way when young people and old people and homeless people are perishing. And so, I mean, does that mean that individuation is a moral concept? Absolutely. See, in my view, any psychology of individuation and maturation is a moral psychology. And in my view, anybody that tries to tell you that it's not is in a trickster inflation. See? Yeah, Charles.
I would explore that. And I think, and I wanted to say too, another thing it seems to me from the point of view of integrity and dealing with other people is that the person who has that generativity can look at people that they're mentoring or people they're dealing with and sometimes put up with what might seem like their foolishness or something for the sake of their growth. I mean, there are going to be times as young adolescents are going to be very aggressive, and one has to sort of put up with it, some of the foolish things, you know. There are going to be other ones who are maybe in the magician thing and are into studying, and they go off on some really...
We call them wise something or other, I can't remember.
Well, you know, it's some of the most ridiculous kinds of things, you know, but not to too quickly say that that's ridiculous, but honor it and let that person grow out of it themselves.
Absolutely.
And a lot of adults that I work with can't do that.
Right.
They want to write the person on.
See, we have to. He's pointing out. Charles Payne is pointing out that so many adults have a hard time being patient with immature behaviors on the part of immature young males and females. Well, isn't that interesting? Because if they were mature, you know, then this wouldn't be a problem. But since they're young and uninitiated and have not been adequately blessed and nurtured and had their energies channeled, then it requires all this sacrificial generativity on the part of adults. And we have forgotten. Now that sounds, you know, the fact is all these tribal cultures understood this for their tribes. They had a high understanding of the human, and they had a high understanding of the responsibilities of the elders and the requirements of patience. You know, they even captured that in Dances with Wolves. The way in which the older warriors in that movie were patient with these young hotshot braves that wanted to get out there and scalp some folks, you know. And the portrayal in that, I think, is highly accurate about the way these older warriors, wise warriors, are about this. They're patient with these young energies. They don't want to depreciate them. They don't want to shame them. They want to keep them inside the tent. Inside the tent. But anyway, that's really important to see. And see, this is when I'm lecturing about kingship and sacrifice, and they say, "You mean this? You mean that sounds masochistic to me? That the fully mature, integrated adult is sacrificial." What? It's the furthest thing from masochism, because it comes out of full empowerment. There's not any weakness in lack of potency or power in this. The fully empowered woman or the fully empowered man simply understands what Charles is talking about. These young people have to have this sacrifice made on their behalf, or they don't enter the community. And what happens in our cities where we have abandoned all of these young females and males happens when we betray them as human beings. And so let me just draw this to close. Some of you want to stick around and chat a few minutes. I'll stay for a few minutes, but until it stops raining. But see, the important thing is for us to get a sense. One of the wonderful things about Jung's psychology is he did not try to shrink human beings down into very small, mechanical, insignificant entities. He believed that individuation was your finding the sort of the gloriousness of your significance, your own destiny, the meaning of your life, and that was not crazy. For you to find the meaning of your life and for you to find your vocation, as the men in the Warrior Network would say, for you to find your mission, this is not an expression of your grandiosity or any kind of negative expression of that. This is a flowering of your humanness. And if you study tribal cultures, they had a sense of the gloriousness of being a woman. They had a sense of the gloriousness of being a man. And they used to dance a lot about that. And you know, it's possible that we get to where we can do that again. And I think that's one of the things that makes Jung's psychology important. And we have to realize that these potentials are here, and that if we have them developed into some integrity and full of gold, masculine and feminine power, then we can rejuvenate and regenerate our communities and create a viable habitat for the human. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I appreciate it.